Welcome everyone to the Roost Publishing's official YouTube channel. I'm Hayden Creel. I am the founder and editor-in-chief of the Roost. We have a very special guest that's going to be coming on later today. Genevieve Balivet. She wrote Into Winter for the Roost over April, and we're going to have her on to discuss her creative processes, what went into the piece, what was her onus for writing it, and where she's going next. Now, this piece, Into Winter, is actually, as we will find out in this interview, a companion piece to another one that she wrote for Fish Ladder, which was a local newspaper in the Grand Rapids area that was connected to Grand Valley State University. So, if you have not read Into Winter or the companion piece, Acorns, that goes with this one, I want you guys to pause this video, head down to the description, and both of those stories will be linked down there. Once you've read both of those, I want you to come back, and then you can sit in while I talk to Genevieve and learn more about how she wrote not only Into Winter, but how its sister piece, Acorns, ties back into it. All right, on with the show. And with me, I have the pleasure, the honor, I have with me Genevieve Balivet. Please, Genevieve, say hi to everybody.
Hello, everyone. It's awesome to be here.
I'm so glad you could join. How you been? If I understand correctly, you just graduated from college. How'd that go for you?
Oh, it was great. It's kind of surreal, obviously, because it's kind of like this structure that we've had for 17 years of schooling is kind of suddenly gone. So it's a little unusual, but I got an internship this past week actually in graphic design, so I'm really excited. Yeah.
Oh yeah, who are you working for, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I'm going to be working with Super Purposes. So it's this company that basically their goal is to help people find their dream careers, careers that will fulfill them, make them feel like they have purpose, things like that. So I'm just going to be a graphic design intern.
Oh, hot damn. That sounds really nice. Well, congratulations for you. But yeah, so you got you're majored in writing. Did you get anything else on top of that, or was it just the writing major?
It's the writing major, although for the first 2.5 years, I was also a stats major because I looked at stats in high school and I was like, um, everyone tells me I can't get a career in writing, so maybe I can be a statistician to pay the bills and then get a writing degree as well. And I realized that I can get a job in writing, and so so basically I was like, oh, I don't actually enjoy stats that much. I'm just going to stick with the writing degree. And by that point, it was second semester of my junior year, and I didn't really have time to add anything else on top of it.
Gotcha. You showed them. Look at you now. You got a job in writing.
Yep.
Well, hot damn. All right. Well, before we get started into anything else, would you like to give us a short little reading of the piece you submitted for the Roost, Into Winter?
Absolutely.
All right, take it away.
Where does my sister go? The backwoods, I suppose, since that's the only thing nearby. Miles of trees, melting into browning cornfields, bleeding into occasional square miles of human habitation, collapsing into the tiny lakes melting glaciers left behind millions of years ago. Plus, she always comes home with dirty feet. She wears sand and white pine needles like slippers, then redistributes them around the house like pixie dust. That dirt is one of the many reasons I don't go outside, into this final blazing vengeance of summer before the quick, cold falls and the frozen, whiteout winters. How she spends her time, I wish I knew. She's never mentioned any friends. And again, she doesn't say much to me. She just stands in the hall with her eyes on the floor, then creeps around me when she thinks I've stopped paying attention. Maybe I'll get a nod or a shrug, a few words to a question I ask. That's it. Jeez, it's been 8 months since Mom died. 8 months since I returned to this hole of a town. You'd think in 8 months I could get my own little sister to talk to me. Right?
Yeah, thank you. That was wonderful. Yeah, so a little bit of behind the scenes for our listeners at home. Genevieve was actually, I think you were the first person to submit. It was between you and Arlana. I can't remember which one happened exactly first. I'm sure I could find out, but you guys were pretty close to first. And I just gotta say, I'm so glad you did, because for also a little bit of context for everyone, we also were in the same graduating class. So I have had the joy of being able to read Genevieve's writing. I think we didn't have intermediate fiction together, but we did have advanced fiction with Kaneko. And man, I'm just so glad you were submitted, because you could write so well. I don't know how else to say it, but yeah, like so tell us about what this piece is, and what like what's it about, and what was your intentions with writing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this piece was kind of an accident, to be completely honest. I was working on a, I guess what you could call a companion piece. This started out as a character exercise, essentially. So I was writing a short story about a young girl. Her name is Lyndon. She's in kind of rural northern Michigan, northwestern Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
and she's living with her sister, and they have a big age difference. And this younger girl is Lyndon is autistic, and so basically she's trying to adjust to her mom dying and her big sister coming in and being her guardian, and so she's trying to like build a connection with her sister, whom she's never really met. And so
Mm.
that's a short story called Acorns, and that got that got published in GVSU's Student Art and Writing Journal, Fish Ladder, and I can talk a little bit more about that later.
Mm.
But for now, this piece was from the point of view of Holly's sister, Lyndon. No, yeah, I mixed that up. It's from the point of view of Lyndon's older sister, Holly.
Right.
So basically, a lot of the story is Acorns is kind of based on this miscommunication between the two sisters. Obviously, because Lynn is autistic, Holly is not. There's obviously like some miscommunication there, but also just the way that they kind of grew up together with their mom, kind of
Mm-hmm.
dealing with some family stuff there, has led them to extremely different ways of like understanding human interaction and communication styles. So
Mm.
as much as I had kind of like Lyndon's perspective, I needed to understand Holly's as well, just so that I could make sure that I was creating a nice kind of balanced story, and so that I could like kind of put in the details about Holly that would kind of imply that she wasn't really clicking with Lynn, and kind of how she wasn't clicking with Lynn. But I had to kind of see that for myself first. And so Into Winter kind of started as like that kind of character study idea, and
Mm.
it just kind of turned into its own thing. So
Yeah, yeah. Because I have had the pleasure of reading Acorns. I think that was still when it was in its drafting phase. I don't know if much changed between that and the fish ladder version. But so I'm assuming that this piece was, like you said, to understand the other dynamic to Lyndon, which is what her older sister's like mentality was. And that absolutely shows through, because in Acorns, I think that's one of the things that I like most about your writing, is the ability to realize a character without any direct like dialogue or interaction. Like I can understand who Holly is just by not only the way she thinks, but like the things she thinks about and in the ways that she thinks about them. Whereas when in Acorns, the other story, the fascination that Lyndon has with acorns, and how every thought that they have loops back to their fascination with oak trees and acorns, and how that is like a repetition throughout the entire narrative. I just thought that was such a great idea, and also conveys to the audience without having to explicitly say it, because I don't think you explicitly say in that story that Lyndon has autism, but just through that narrative device, we as the audience can just get it. Yeah, so this and Acorns are like twin pieces. Are you planning on doing anything past with these two and building this out into a larger narrative, or are you going to keep these as their own like short story bits?
Yeah, I think I'm going to be keeping them as kind of their own short stories, just because I feel like I've everything that is necessary for those stories has been kind of put into these two pieces. Um, I would love to do kind of similar pieces. I'm currently developing a kind of fantasy story with kind of a similar environment in terms of like the woods and kind of a similar dynamic between between siblings and between them and their mom. So kind of similar, kind of along similar lines. But that's kind of the main similarity. I think Acorns and Into Winter, as pieces, have kind of like come to rest, as it were. They've kind of landed and they've kind of come to an end. So, and I'm very happy with them both.
I do want to say, so what are some of your biggest inspirations here in your writing style? Because I know one of the things that I noticed you do really well in your writing is the using of like metaphors to describe what's happening in the story. So for example, like saying that Lyndon was trailing around like a lost balloon, or the pixie dust that you gave us in the example of how she brought in like pine cone or pine needles and sand. And then I think the one that stuck out with me the most was the trees against an overwhelming white armada. I love all of those visuals. Like where did that writing style come from, and how did you develop that?
That's a great question. I think I will say, when I was little, some of the first things that I ever kind of started reading was poetry. My grandfather loves poetry, and so he and I are very close, and so he would like introduce to me a lot of his kind of favorites, and they were like old classic poets. So I'm trying to think of some examples, but Tennyson, Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, kind of a lot of those really kind of old, um, those very old classic poems. And those are absolutely just dripping with metaphor and simile and vivid language. And so I think a love of just very lyrical and poetic and imagery filled language has always kind of been a great love of mine. And so I think, yep, and that's kind of been tempered over the years with like reading some more, I guess, less lyrical pieces because I still do like reading poetry. I can say that it's one of the genres that I've never completely understood, and it intimidates me a little bit. So I've read a lot of, yeah, it's kind of more of a it's more of a genre where I was uh it's like this is so cool. I am not sure I understand it to the point that I can produce poetry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well,
Mhm.
that's really interesting because normally, at least when I've spoken to other writers about their craft, like the writing that inspired them is like their home, or it's like where they started. But I that's really interesting to be like to have the forethought, or at least the foresight to be like, man, there's a lot going on here. I have much to learn. I'll come back to this later. I gotta go figure out how to write for myself before I can come back to that. That's really interesting. But I mean, even still, like you're doing poetry things in all of your prose here, at least with all of uh the metaphors and similes, and like there's a third word that I cannot that's not coming to my brain right now. But you get my point where the it's not only just the descriptions that you give things, but also you know when to describe something. You know what I mean? Like I think at
Mhm.
the your story, yours and Noah's were the two stories that from the first paragraph, like I was sitting down and all right, I'm reading this now. Where you had like my sister disappearing, interest. All right, why? What? Excuse me. Tell me more. And then just giving us the correct amount of detail, like just telling us that she's coming home from the Devies. We get the bird morning calls. We like get that little moment where we hear about the bus stop that she's coming home from, and like those, I don't know how else to put it, but like as a writer, you just get it. You know what needs to be in there and what doesn't need to be there, and it seems like you have already done the pruning in your mind as to what needs to go on the page. And that's actually one of the things I admire most about your writing is you say what needs to be there, not what you want to or what like it's what needs to physically be there to make the story work. Um
Thank you.
yeah. So if poetry is one of your major inspirations, but do you have any like authors that you also like to pull from or that have influenced your writing in some way?
Let's see. I read so many books when I was young that all of the authors that I read kind of meld together. I will say, I think because I am someone who also really likes fantasy, that I think Brandon Sanderson and Naomi Novik have both been kind of big inspirations in my writing. Brandon Sanderson, because obviously he's kind of one of the major fantasy writers of today, kind of a modern day Tolkien, or especially with like the scope of his world building, it's absolutely giant, and I think that's just he comes up with such cool and unique magic systems, and I'm always really interested by that.
Gotcha.
Um,
I've actually never heard of Brandon Sanderson before, so it looks like this one's missed me. But I'm looking at some of the, I'm just looking at the images of the titles. I'm like, oh yeah, this guy writes fantasy. Big bold
yeah,
letters, a dude casting lightning on the front cover. Oh yeah,
yeah.
I've seen these before. And then who was the second one that you said? Naomi. What was her last name?
Naomi Novik. She's another kind of fantasy writer. She does a lot of fantasy retellings. I was introduced to her by her book Spinning Silver, which is kind of a mixture of like Rumpelstiltskin and Beauty and the Beast, but it's kind of set in a more, I would say it feels like a more grounded world. I think it's set in kind of northeastern uh, Europe or northeastern Asia, or kind of a Russia-like world. Because one of the main characters is Jewish and her father's Jewish, and she's kind of like taken over her father's money lending business. So it's kind of like this really cool combination of kind of like fantasy, but also grounding, kind of in very real and kind of very kind of historical settings. And I think
Hmm.
that's also really cool to me. But those are it's weird though because we're talking like Into Winter and Acorns are like they're not exactly fantasy stories, which is kind of unusual for me. um, but I think from fantasy I have learned kind of the importance of creating like strong core characters, and a relationship and a dynamic and conflict within that that kind of moves the characters through the world, and kind of like letting the characters inform the world, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
No, it does.
Yeah, this would be a very different story if it was like if it was a fantasy thing, if it was like set in a different place. I feel like the setting is very important for the characters, and so it's kind of like even though this is kind of outside of my normal genres, I feel like kind of the principles that I've taken from fantasy very much kind of inform how I kind of constructed the story.
Yeah. And even though that this isn't directly a fantasy story, I can still see, like you said, the fingerprints of fantasy where Lyndon is living in a world that our other characters don't understand. Like it's a mystery to them. They don't like properly understand how her mind works or how she thinks or how it's different from everyone else, which is very similar to how in fantasy where it's like we're living in a world that we don't understand, whereas this is just a much smaller like microcosm version of that same type of like narrative structure, which I see in your piece here. And then also, I do notice that there are many calls to. I mean, not only does Lyndon have a fascination with acorns and trees of that like, but then also there's a lot of splicing in of forestry and nature-esque type descriptions where you had like her hair looked like tumbleweeds or the trees on the Wire Mata. I do see a lot of that in your piece as well. which makes me think, like, is the forest your favorite setting? Because I'm noticing a lot of foresty themes in the writing that you're doing.
Yes, it kind of is.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I think I grew up around a lot of forests. Obviously,
Mm.
I live in Michigan, so there's like a decent number of pretty-ish sorts of wilderness scattered around. And then I also, when I was little, I also had some relatives who lived in Vermont and Alaska and kind of some more rural, very woodsy areas. And so I remember having like summers at my grandpa's cabin in Vermont, and it was just kind of it was on a mountain, and it was just this very magical place to me. Like there were all just these groves of trees and like this whole kind of strip of woodlands that was just ferns and just all these beautiful plants, and I could just wander around and get lost and go searching for fairies and like my aunts would like show me the flowers and like show me their names and show me how to dry them, and it was all very like cottage core, very core fantasy. And I think that kind of wonder has always stuck with me. And it does show in a lot of my pieces. A lot of my pieces have to do with forests and nature.
So that does lead into another thing that I would love to talk about is how did this story get started? Like, what was the initial idea that sprouted into your head that eventually evolved into these stories?
So when talking about kind of the inspiration of Into Winter and Acorns both, I'm afraid this is kind of turning into a joint talking about both because they are kind of both part of that same main narrative thread. Kind of the inspiration for both these stories came when I was at the Bear River Writers Conference, which takes place every August, I believe, and it's hosted by the University of Michigan. And they have like this, it's basically summer camp for writers. And it very much inspired kind of the setting of this piece because it's got these beautiful kind of oak and pine forests surrounding this beautiful lake. I think it's called Walloon Lake. And it's absolutely gorgeous up there. It was like 3 days where we just basically, we had writing workshops and we, were working with authors to improve our craft. And, there were readings and all kinds of opportunities to share our work. But there was also just a lot of time to wander around and kind of take space if you needed it and just work on your stuff. So I was in, I think I was in advanced fiction with Professor Todd Kaneko at the time. And it was, start of the fall semester, over Labor Day weekend. And so I was just trying to think of like story ideas because we have, for some context, we have to write 2 8 to 20 page papers in that class. So I was trying to just come up with some ideas early so I could kind of get started on that. And I was working on like a creative nonfiction piece, but I didn't really have any particular fiction piece ideas. But I noticed that as I was walking through these forests to the food hall to workshop each day, I noticed there were just all these beautiful just acorns lying around. And me being part magpie and loving shiny things or pretty things, and of course the forest, I just started picking them up and collecting them. And then all of a sudden I was like, what if there was a character who's like who was autistic and like their special interest was acorns. So they were kind of that was kind of the inception for Lyndon's character. And then I was like, okay, so how do I kind of build up a world around her? Kind of as I was figuring that out, like I said, this kind of character study turned story came into being. And like all this was kind of this early stuff was written while I was at that conference. And just sitting by the lake and just listening to the waves and writing it there. And I think that was very important for kind of the early development of this piece because I was capturing all these details while I was there that I wasn't really able to recreate in, Grand Rapids, Michigan, once I returned from that. So I think that was a very valuable experience, and I think without that, I probably wouldn't have written either of these stories.
Really interesting. But yeah, so I guess another thing that I did want to talk about is you wrote Lyndon to be autistic, and you yourself are also an autistic person. And you also, what was the name of the organization you were working for prior to in Grand Rapids? The one that was about it was like the LGBT Diversity
Yeah,
Center. What was the name of it again?
Ottawa Area Center for Pride.
That's the one. I'm assuming another one of the onuses for writing this story was exploring autism in writing and writing it to show, like, hey guys, we're not enigmas who are scary. Like, we're people too. You know,
Hmm.
we just think differently. So, would you like to talk about your experiences as an autistic person and then how that informed why this needed to be written?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned, kind of writing an autistic character was kind of one of the key ideas that kind of brought this piece to life. So when I went to Bear River Writers Conference, I was still just figuring out that I was autistic, and
Mm,
it was kind of a surreal experience. I didn't ever get a diagnosis as a child. My mom had some suspicions, but never like looked into it.
hmm
And then, so when I kind of figured it out in junior year, it was kind of a not world shattering, but it kind of felt like everything was defamiliarized for me. Like all of these things that I've just kind of lived with and never noticed consciously, but kind of noticed unconsciously and kind of felt unconsciously were suddenly coming to light, and I was suddenly understanding what they were, why they were happening, how they were happening, kind of my thought processes behind that. And part of that, as a writer, was me realizing that, whoops, I'm accidentally writing a lot of characters autistic, and I didn't mean to do that. Whoops.
Well, yeah. So I'm assuming because I've also, I mean, I'm not autistic myself, but I think a lot of at least well, writers we kind of have to think about this. This because we have to put characters on the page. At least when I switched into writing and then started writing things down on the page about like characters and stuff, you had to take stock of like how your brain works, if that makes sense. Just like going back and
Mhm.
thinking about like things you do, why you think the way you do. Like, no one ever tells you to do this, but then suddenly when you have to put things on a page, it's like, well, shit, why do I think like this? Why did my thoughts always circle back to this, et cetera, et cetera. So I had a
Mhm.
similar experience to yours where like once you're getting close to the end of college, you're like, does everybody think like this? Am I wait, is this an everybody experience or is this just a me thing? And it sounds like you had that where you're like, wait a minute, no, this is actually a me thing. You guys don't
Mhm.
just think that way? Wait a minute, hold on. I was under the assumption that everyone did. Oh, wait, all my characters are
Mhm.
autistic. Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. I got a new frame of mind now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And kind of from that, I think one reason for writing this was like it was kind of my first time writing an explicitly and intentionally autistic character. I wanted to kind of write a specifically autistic experience. And that it was in this particular case of kind of, I guess it's more general, but kind of being misunderstood by the people around us, kind of like not understanding our communication styles, our love languages, things like that. And like I said, Lyndon's not entirely, it's not always her autism. Some of it is just kind of the way she grew up, kind of her relationship with her mom, stuff like that. But her autism certainly augments that. And so I ended up writing about a specifically autistic experience of being misunderstood, but it also kind of turned into a story about situations where caretakers or guardians or parents feel the need, and this is minor spoilers for Acorns, but they feel the need to kind of place their autistic relatives in the care of someone else, like a home or something like that. And I wanted to, and obviously it's kind of a situation that kind of sucks for everyone because it's like usually the caretakers are overwhelmed. They don't have structural support, systemic support. They don't have the societal understanding needed to kind of, take care of their loved ones and kind of go out with their loved ones in public. So they kind of receive some residual stigma, and that's very draining. That's very tough on their social relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, for the autistic people, it also sucks because it's like you're misunderstood. Maybe you feel like a burden. Maybe you feel like your parents or guardians don't want you, and that's a
Mm.
terrible feeling.
Oh,
And that's
100%.
yep. And a lot of times, I don't want to say that like I don't want to make generalizations, but specifically in the story Acorns, Lyndon is kind of the one who gets the short end of the stick. Like it's
Mm.
both. It sucks for both of them, but it's Lyndon who's kind of taken away from her home, taken away from her sister, whom she just wants to, connect with and, just wants to love. And so it's like, I think, obviously, Acorns is that story. So Acorns is obviously Lyndon's side of that, but the motivation of writing Into Winter is understanding kind of all of the forces that are working on Holly. So like grad school and doing it remotely. And I set this kind of back in time, so it's not as though we're not as though it's not in modern day. It's kind of like early 2000s where like online schooling isn't really a widespread thing. So she's
Mm.
trying to do that. She was forced to move away from the city back into the small town, which she really doesn't like.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, she did care about her mom, even though their relationship was a little tenuous and a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
And, she's from a low income family, so there's kind of like some stress there. And then, on top of all that, she's like trying to take care of her sister. And she's
Mm.
never really done that before. She doesn't really know her sister. So it's like Acorns is kind of like all of the kind of revealing all of the thought processes on Lyndon's side and kind of showing how that kind of leads to this kind of difficult and painful ending.
Mm-hmm.
But for Into Winter is very much like Holly is not. I am not placing the blame on Holly by any means. Like I understand. Like I'm showing to readers that I like. She is going through so much stuff, and she doesn't have the emotional and mental bandwidth to. Well, Lyndon isn't diagnosed, so that's one issue. So she doesn't even have the language to understand why Lyndon works the way she works. But secondly, so like that, and additionally, she just doesn't have the bandwidth to try to figure out and understand things because she's working, she's in grad school, she's trying to keep her and her sister fed. Just all of these things, all of these very difficult things that she's going through.
Exactly. But it's like what you said, where yes, they're both, it sucks for everyone, but Lyndon does have the shorter end of the stick because what little agency still exists lives in Holly's hands. Like she's the one in charge. I have to be the big sister. I have to pseudo be a mother now, or at least a caretaker for this for my sister who is undiagnosed but is still autistic and has special needs that she needs accommodated. That's just who she is. The point being that you did do a great job of showing that it sucks for everybody and then getting into Holly's mind and just giving the reader context, being like, guys, it's not that she doesn't care, it's just that she has so little time to care with because everything is eating at her and she has to be on all the time and she doesn't have the bandwidth to come home and then also care for her sister who needs more attention, or at least different kinds of attention than any other kid would need, which you did do a great job of showing that in Into Winter, which I thought was great.
Yeah, thank you. Oh man, I think Holly's role is definitely important here. And I feel like Into Winter kind of, I guess, makes her more of a character to me anyway. I know that Holly would be very different if I hadn't written Into Winter. And I'm very glad that I did. and I think it turned out pretty well, and it really helped me kind of figure out how to write Lyndon's perspective and kind of like how to write Lyndon in a way that Ollie kind of developed through Into Winter would kind of misunderstand. So it's kind of like setting up this lens helped me write from a different lens and kind of like write out a list of like, okay, so here's what happens. Here's how each of the characters interprets it, kind of based on these two things. So I think if there's any moral of the story to this, it's well, obviously, autistic representation is important.
100%.
That's kind of a no-brainer. But I feel like it's also like there's something called the double empathy problem. And I'm going to get a little academic with this, so if you'll pardon me.
Please, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
So the double empathy problem is essentially like says that it's not just that autistic people are like hard to understand, it's just a difference in communication styles. So it's like basically autistic people, there's this thing called masking where people kind of like cover their autistic traits and try to like act more neurotypical. And so like autistic people make a lot of effort to kind of understand neurotypical communication styles and patterns of behavior and things like that. Whereas neurotypical people don't make as much effort to understand autistic people or neurodivergent people more generally.
It's a one-way street for communication.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yes,
Okay.
and so the double empathy problem says that there should be kind of two-way street of communication, kind of efforts to understanding each other, not just autistic people and neurodivergent people trying to basically conform to neurotypical ways of existing and communicating. But yeah, I think I guess the way where I'm going with kind of explaining the double empathy problem is that I think it's important. It was important for me to kind of show myself that I knew how a neurotypical person would interpret autistic actions, and that's kind of like a meta thing where it's like I, as an autistic person, understand how this neurotypical person understands autistic people. Yeah, so it's kind of that multi-level thing as well as kind of like a little more direct, like me as an autistic person understanding how Lynn would understand a neurotypical person, but also understanding how she's misunderstanding the neurotypical cues. Yeah, so it was a lot of like switching of lenses and layers of understanding, and I think Into Winter was very important to make sure that I really was kind of understanding everything, and so that I could kind of put these two stories together.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, that is because the story, while it has its own message, it also is a sandbox for you to experiment with these types of themes. Because I'm going to assume that you are going to take the things that you have learned here into the rest of your writing, because there are many, like you just said, the lenses idea of having to shift your perspective between what characters think. Oh man, when writers master that, damn, you get it. You know. So I'm so glad that you succeeded in what you were going after, which was trying to write a story from two characters' perspectives, and that we as the reader or the audience can feel that through the page. It doesn't sound like one monotone voice, that there are distinct voices in between each one of the pieces, which was great. So I guess now that we're getting pretty close to the end here, what are you doing now? Like, where could people find you? What, if you can be found anywhere, what are you working on right now? What makes you excited for the future? Tell us about what Genevieve's going to be doing in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, I just got an internship with Super Purposes, so that's really exciting. And then I'm still volunteering at the Ottawa Area Center for Pride, where I write blog posts about queer issues. So if you're looking for more of my writing, interested in that, it's kind of more specifically about queer issues, queer identities, and they have a blog. So that is Ottawa Area Center for Pride.org. And then they have a little blog tab there. Mhm.
That link will be in the description of this video, so anybody who is interested, please go ahead and check out Genevieve's work. If you liked her writing at all in her fiction, I can guarantee that you'll like her blog as well. So please go ahead and check that out. But are you working on any more fiction in the meantime, or are you still in the I'm taking a break and I'll come back to it phase?
Yeah. So what I'm doing a couple of different things. So on a more kind of serious quote unquote scale, I am working on a creative nonfiction piece about fandom and friendship, and I'm hoping to get that published. But that could take some time. But I'm very excited about that. And then something else that I'm doing, just as kind of like a creative exercise slash game for myself, is I'm writing a kind of long form story in short form snippets. Essentially, it's every chapter of this story is 3 sentences and under 100 words. So it's kind of an exercise where I'm trying to tell a complete story through very short snippets, and it's making me very much think about how to write punchy sentences, how to be concise, how to be focused, how to kind of highlight the most important things kind of in the story. And I sometimes struggle with concision because, again, I was raised on some very wordy writers. So I am trying to break those habits and basically just write something long with kind of short snippets.
It sounds to me like you are inching ever closer with each one of your writings, closer and closer to a poetry format. Because it sounds like with the restrictions you're putting on yourself, it's like that's getting pretty close to poetry territory. I'm noticing. Maybe one day she'll write some poetry, hopefully. Because I don't know if you watch the news lately, but there's some people saying you can't write poetry. That's kind of fucked up if you ask me. So like just saying, if you could, and then be like, what's this then, bozo? That would be kind of funny, is all I'm saying. But anyway, sorry, not to interrupt. You were saying something else.
Yeah, yeah, that's okay. And then I would love to write some poetry, but we will see. We will
We
see
will see. We will
what
see.
happens.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. Yep. And then the last kind of thing that I am working on that I mentioned earlier is just started to develop a new fantasy piece, again, kind of with some characters in a magical forest, kind of some siblings dealing with changing dynamics with each other, changing dynamics with their mother. So kind of in that sort of thing. And it is based on a song. I would have to look up the title because I completely forgot it. But it's absolutely it's gonna be fun.
And I'm looking forward to it because I'm gonna be real. I want to be reading all the rest of the stuff you're gonna write because it's pretty good. Ladies and gentlemen, please, this was Genevieve Balivet with her piece Into Winter, published with The Roost. Thank you so much for coming on, Genevieve. It was a wonderful time. I'm glad we got to hear more from you, and hopefully, don't want to put this onus on you, but hopefully, we'll get to hear more from you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Wow. What an interview. What a person Genevieve is. You know, there's a quote that I think about a lot. Originally was said by Hans Beth. He said that there are two types of geniuses. Ordinary geniuses do great things, but they leave you room to believe that you could do the same if only you had worked hard enough. Then there are magicians, and you have no idea how they do it. To me, Genevieve is a magician. Like the way that she crafts words into stories and narratives, you could give me 1,000 years of practice. I would never be able to come to the conclusion she does in her art. Like, it just fascinates me. Her process, how she tells stories, how visual she can be without even a lick of dialogue in between these sentences. Like, her way of writing, it's magic. It's magic to me. So I am eternally grateful that she not only took out the time to write this piece for the Roost, but also came on and talked about how her magical process works, because it will forever fascinate me. I hope you all enjoyed this interview with Genevieve. Now, please, 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 I'll remind you again, all of the links that Genevieve and I talked about are down in the doobly-doo. So please take a look at them. Support her in all of her artistic efforts, because she has more than earned it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for this interview, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Now get on out of here.